Welcome all, my name is Andy Pace, and I am going to be showing you how to use the Soup plugin, the Shatter and Scatter. Soup was developed by Peter Shipkov. I hope I'm saying that name right, I'm probably not. It's an amazing set of tools. This is just a small feature of it. This is a great way to break up objects in Maya because Maya doesn't have a great shattering script. There is one included. It doesn't work too well, I've found, and this seems to be a great solution for what we need to do today, which is blow up a planet. That is the goal for today. This is on today's do list. Let me show you what we're going to be creating here. We're going to be creating this little explosion. I didn't bother to texture the planet or anything like that. I simply wanted to focus on the breakup and the shattering of the planet. I rendered this out and threw it into After Effects, put some optical flares in there and some camera shake, some stars in the background, and a nice little nebula over here, just to give sort of a feel for what it would look like. This is just done in a couple hours. It's nothing fancy. First, we need to download the Soup plugins. Alright, once you've unpacked it, I unpacked it on the desktop here, we can open up this folder. Now these instructions are pretty straightforward. It shows you how to install them on Mac, and Windows is actually here in the wiki. Right here. This is how you would install it in Windows. You come here to the plugin manager under Windows Settings and Preferences, and you can load up the Soup bundle. And I'm just going to load in Maya because... Alright, so once you start here, I have the shelf loaded. In order to load the shelf, the Soup shelf, just go to Load Shelf, and you're going to go and find that folder. Mine was on the desktop. It's going to be under Soup, Shelves, and you can just load that up and click Open. If you've put the icons in the correct place, these icons will show up, no problem. So we're going to leave this shelf here, and we are going to create a volume primitive. We are going to create actually a polygon. We're going to create a sphere. We were going to create a sphere. There we go. Alright, I'm going to create, this is going to be our planet. So I'm going to name it Planet Original. It's kind of important because we're going to need to duplicate this later. And I'm just going to kind of even out. I'm going to make the radius 10 just because I like working with even numbers. It helps me not get confused. Alright, so to start this, I should probably save my scene. And I should probably find my project file. I'm just going to save it to the desktop. Planet Explosion. Explode 001 underscore begin. Cool. Alright, we're going to open up the Hypershade here. You can either do it by having the split windows or just going into rendering Hypershade. We will be working in here in the work area so we can see our different nodes. To start, I'm going to select my object, and I'm going to come over here. I'm going to click on this bowl of noodles icon, whatever that is, and I'm going to click on Scatter. Now in here you'll see the two scatter nodes. One is the transform, one is the shape. I'm going to select the shape, and then I'm going to come here to these two arrows. This is going to show the inputs and the outputs of that, and bam, look at that, it's connected to our shape of the sphere, so we're already in good shape. To follow along, I am actually using this this tutorial by, I forget this guy's name, Jimmy Goonwan. And again, I hope I'm saying that. Forgive me if I'm making any mistakes with that enunciation. Guy's got an amazing amount of tutorials for the soup, and he's done a fantastic job. This was the script, or the tutorial that I started from. Kind of shows you how to get the scatter going. Does a great job. Alright, so back here, I'm going to select this. This was all good. Next, I'm going to come over here to the noodle bowl again, and I'm going to click Shatter. Alright, so these two guys, these two nodes, are what we need. And before I start making connections, I am going to duplicate this, and I'm going to call it planet_broken geo. I want to see that in here, so I'm going to go to the outliner. And I don't want to see the transform node. I don't need to see that, so I'm going to click here in the outliner and show shapes. And I can literally middle mouse button this into here, so that is the shape node of this broken polygon, the broken planet. Hopefully you know the difference between transform and shape nodes. I'm assuming that you do. Transform just obviously holds all the information for transform, and the shape is more the information of the polys and the mesh and all that stuff. Okay, so now to do the connections. We're going to connect the scatter shape to the shatter node. And over here in this tutorial, they have the actual connections that you can make through the connection editor. Oh yay, LinkedIn. But there's this icon here. This little plug, the plug literally is it says connect, and we can come over here, and we're going to choose this first one, which is the out geometry to the in geometry of from the scatter to the shatter. We're going to connect that. We can see that connection here from shatter out to shatter in, the out geometry to the in geometry. We're going to do that again. We're going to select the scatter shape and the shatter shape. That's a mouthful. And then we're going to connect the out position PP to the in position PP, which hopefully your mind just didn't go to the gutter there. Awesome. So the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to connect the shatter to our second shape here. And I can just come up here to this connect again, and there's only going to be one option, the out to the in mesh, the out geometry to the in mesh. We're going to connect that. Alright, so this is the fun part. Now let me explain a bit about how this works, or from what I gathered. I'm not an expert in this, so kind of so the scatter node here, I can come over into the attribute editor. We have different volumes or different types of shattering. I want to do both. You can just shatter it on the surface, and you can see these points of where it's going to actually break up the. I think these are actually vertices of where it's going to break up the that mesh. But I actually want it to be a solid shape, since planets tend to be solid, and they tend to have a core of some sort. So I'm actually going to do both. You can do volume, but I actually, obviously I want this surface to be shattered as well, so I'm going to do both. The point density is the amount of vertices it uses to calculate the shapes of the shatters. This is not how many shards you're going to get, it's just, I think, how many vertices that you're actually going to end up getting. 2000 is a bit high. It's actually super high, especially for this. I'm on a MacBook Pro with a dual core. I'm going to lower this to 500, and that's still probably going to take a couple, well, probably 10 to 15 minutes to shatter. So once I'm ready, I'm going to come over here to this shatter node. I can also select it over here, and this is the one that's actually going to do the job. I am going to reduce my distances, the distance between each shard, so you can actually have it cracked up, like pre-cracked up, but I want it to actually appear like it's all one piece, so I'm going to reduce that to 0. And once I hit auto evaluate, it is going to evaluate the shards, and that's going to take a little while, so I'm going to hit auto evaluate, and I will see what happens. It'll probably take 10-15 minutes. Mine is going to appear frozen. It'll probably say, not responding, but don't quit it. After 15 minutes for 500 shards, it might not do so much. It can crash if your point density is too high, so just be careful, kind of experiment there. But I'm going to keep this around 500, and once I auto-evaluate, it's probably going to take about 15 minutes. Alright, here is our cracked file. So we can see all this geometry, and if we look at the ghosted view here, it's looking pretty wild. We can see all the shards in there, making it a solid sphere. Cool. So for this example, I won't need the scatter anymore. So, and you kind of don't want to mess with this, just because you don't want to keep hitting auto evaluate. And one thing that I did find is that if I close this Maya file and I reopen it, it's going to appear to be, the shape is going to appear to be gone, and you're just going to see these points. It's actually going to look like this if you open this again. And basically what you have to do is you just have to auto evaluate again. So right now I'm just going to hit bake result, and what that does is actually it just simply creates another geo right here without the history. So I am going to actually copy this, and I'm going to call it baked. Alright, so I'm going to hide this stuff here. I don't want to bother it. This is appearing in the wireframe because it doesn't have a shader assigned to it, so I'm just going to grab a Lambert here and put it on. Very cool. And now here comes the simple part. I'm going to make this dynamic because I want to explode it and rip it apart. End mesh and the end cloth works pretty well. I'm just going to reset these settings. We're going to create a new solver. You could attach this to a solver, existing solver if you had one, and basically just create the end cloth. Funny thing is, it's going to, if you scrub through the timeline, it should begin, you can see that dropping a little bit. That's because it's being affected by gravity. There are different ways to get it to not be affected by gravity or to have it hold. My option is actually I'm just going to go to the nucleus, and I'm going to take off this gravity here. So if I just play through, it's going to not fall. You're going to get this nucleus evaluation skipped because the frame change is too large. Don't worry about that. You're always going to get it. Most of you won't have a computer that can actually handle that. So in order to see the result, the full result, you're going to have to cache it, which we will do later when we're ready. In order to get this to break up, I need to apply some forces to it. But first is this is all one piece of geometry. And actually with nCloth, there's a nifty little trick that I found out from doing the tutorial, the soup tutorial, that you can use polygon shells. These are going to self-collide, so everything's good here. Just make sure we check that use polygon shells. Cool. So in order to add a force, which is what I'm going to use something in the fields here. I can do, I'm going to do a couple different fields. This is kind of where it gets fun, and I'll show you how you can use different fields to break things up. You really have a really awesome amount of options here. So in order to create a field that's actually going to affect this geometry, I first want to select the geometry and then click the field. So in this case, I'm going to create a gravity, which created in the center here. Barely able to see that. Alright. So on the whole, this gravity is actually just going to act like gravity, and this probably should start falling. Now obviously we don't want it to fall because this is a planet in space, and while it probably is being acted upon by gravity, we are not really simulating gravity. So I want to limit the area of the gravity's effect. So I'm going to go into the gravity node and go into volume control attributes and select sphere. Now this gravity is only going to affect objects within the sphere. So actually I'm going to make this a bit bigger, and I'm going to start. Actually, I can show you what this is going to do. Let's say I make this. I'm going to elongate my frames here so you can actually see what's going on. So these pieces down here will be affected by this gravity field. Now in order to see this, and this is usually fairly quick, again I'm on a dual core here, so I can come up to cache, end cache, and create new cache. I'll go to the option box for the first time. I am going to use one file. Sometimes if you have a larger cache, you can do one file per frame. I'm just going to do one file. I'm going to leave everything the same here. I could even come up and hit reset the settings, and then remember to click that one file. If you want a better evaluation, you would evaluate in subframes, like every 0.2 frames or whatever. But one frame is fine for this. So I'm going to hit create, and it's going to run through the simulation. As you can see, these shards that are being affected, that are inside this gravity well, are the ones that are actually getting destroyed, or they're getting torn down. Alright. Cool deal. Now you're seeing stuff up here because these are so close together. They're almost like pieces in a puzzle. They're actually, when these are falling and they're tumbling, they're actually self-colliding. Even though some of them are, they're interpenetrating, like right here, they're still colliding with each other, so they're sending movement. They're sending movement and energy up into here. It's basically acting, like the real world. So that's why these are getting shaken apart. So okay, so I can run through the nCloth quickly, and that's looking pretty cool. Alright, but what I want to do is I actually want to bring it up here. I am actually going to reverse the gravity direction because this is in space, and I want it to be, this isn't quite a realistic explosion. This is more of an explosion as if there was like an outside force. Okay, so I am actually going to add another force here, and I want to add a turbulence force. Turbulence is going to break this up even faster. It's going to kind of send these shards into chaos. So I'm going to kind of line it up here with the gravity field here. And I'm actually, you can, the better way is to actually group these. I'm going to group these two fields, and now I'm going to animate this group. So let's say start it on frame 6. Don't worry about this. We'll have it come in and grow, actually. So it's going to come in and grow. Alright, cool. So I'm going to select this turbulence field, and again, like the gravity, I don't want it to immediately start acting on the force, so I'm going to go to volume control attributes and select the sphere again, and I'm going to scale it up just like I did with the gravity, but probably a little bigger because I want there to be more chaos before everything starts moving, translating. I'm going to move the noise level up to 1, and I'm going to, the attenuation is the fall off of the effect from the center of the sphere to the outside, which means the outside has less magnitude than the center. I kind of don't want that, so I'll just put it to 0.2. For the magnitude, I'm going to raise that up to about 40. Again, you can experiment with this. It's really easy to experiment because all you have to do is recache the simulation, or if you have a strong enough computer, you could probably just run the simulation, depending on how many shards you've broken up your planet into. Cool, so let's run the simulation again just to see what it looks like. When we run it again, I can just go to create cache, and I just want to replace the existing one because I don't really need that old cache. Okay, so it completed caching, and this is our result, which is a little bit better. That's pretty cool. I'm actually going to take this magnitude, and I'm probably just going to throw it up to 80, probably just double that. Alright, my last thing, the last field that I'm going to create in order to create this twirling effect here and the spreading effect. Both of those are from the same field. So I'm going to select this planet again, and I'm going to go to volume axis field, which is probably one of the most versatile fields. You might even be able to get away with doing all of this just in the volume axis field, but it's definitely a very powerful field for any sort of dynamics. And again, I'm going to go into the volume control attributes and turn it into a sphere because I don't want it to affect the force just yet. There we go. Alright, and I put that under the group here, so it's going to be animated. It's going to move just like that with the group. For this one, I am going to do something a little bit special. I am going to animate some of these features, particularly the magnitude and the away from center and the around axis. Actually, I'm going to move this around axis to 1, which you can see this arrow appeared here, which means the objects are going to be forced into an orbit, pretty much like a centripetal force that's acting on them. And you can change that direction by going to -1. So I want them to kind of spin around, give it this cool little effect. Away from center, I'm going to take this to 0, and you'll see those arrows disappeared. And once I brought them back, this is the direction. So this is sort of the explosion, and that's the direction that the objects are going to fly. So I want to take that to 0 to start with, and I want that to start around here, around frame 29. So I'm going to key it at frame 29, and I want this to be a sudden effect because it's an explosion, right? So I'm actually going to, well, let's try 2. I'm going to key it at 32, and I'm going to put the away from center at 2. Now let's see what this looks like. Once again, I'm just going to come over here and create a new cache and replace. I think I could just hit replace cache. Doesn't really matter. It's just a few extra buttons. So it ran the simulation, and this is our result. Not quite what I wanted. I do like the spin though. So you can see these objects are kind of spinning. That's kind of cool. I like that. So I actually might want to increase that. I'm going to increase that to probably 2, just so we can see it. And I wanted that explosion to actually have an explosion effect on it. So I'm going to key the magnitude at frame 29, and then also key it at 32, but I'm going to increase the magnitude to like 100. We're going to see what this does. Okay, so I cached it, and I'm pretty sure this is more like it. We're getting that sudden explosion. Zoom out here. But the clip kind of ends a little too suddenly for me. So actually what I'm going to extend it to, I'm going to probably extend it to like 120. And instead of having to recache it, I am just going to append from cache. So I'm going to come over here to frame 49 where I know it's cached. I could do 50, but I'll just do 49. I can do append to cache. We'll do the option box here. We're going to go from the current time to the end of the time slider, which is right over here. And basically I'm just going to hit append, and it's going to start caching. It's going to use all that information from that original simulation, and it's just basically going to continue it. Okay, so here's the basic setup that I'm going to render out with. It's a bit different from the one we just had open. Same sort of field, 3-field affecting the simulation. There's, I think, 700 for my point density on this one. Probably should have gone even more. But this was pretty basic. I have an Omni light here that has a decay on it, a quadratic decay. So let me prepare this for After Effects, because I want to bring in, since I have the camera movement here, the camera is actually animated. You can see I'm zooming out, and then it's kind of slowly drifting to the side here. Let me show you how to prep this for After Effects. So I know that I want a lens flare right in the middle of this planet. So I'm going to come over here, and I'm going to create a locator. Locator is actually going to be exactly where I want it. I'm going to scale this up just so I can see it. And then the naming, you have to name the locator a very specific way for it to actually import into After Effects. We're going to call it null underscore. You have to basically do null underscore, and then you can name it whatever. So we'll do planet core LOC, just for locator. You don't have to name it that. The most important thing is to put null in front of it, so it can act like a null object, which is an object in After Effects. Now I can, the only two things that I'm actually going to be importing from this when I import the file into After Effects, the only things it's going to keep is that null locator and the render cam, which might seem like it's not much, but it's plenty for compositing. It saves me a bunch of time. I don't have to track for the lens flare. It's pretty awesome. But to get the animation out of the camera, I'm actually going to have to bake the simulate or bake the keys in. So right here, obviously, we're using Maya's tweening system. If we look in the graph editor, we can see that these curves are here. And for some reason, After Effects doesn't quite work like that. I can't quite understand those graphs, at least the interpolation between the keys. So basically, I'm going to select the camera, come over here to Edit, Keys, and Bake Simulation. You can come over here, reset everything, and bake it. It's going to pretty much put a key on every single frame of the camera. One thing to note when you're preparing a Maya scene to import to After Effects is to be careful of the number of cameras that you have. You can get away with the default camera and another camera. I have the perspective camera and the render cam. It's not going to go for these orthographic views. But if I had another render cam, it might confuse After Effects, so it's usually just best to sort of delete every other camera that you're not using and just use the render cam. So I'm going to save this file. And you can see I already saved it over here. I'll just save a different version. I'm going to call this AE for After Effects, so I know when I go into After Effects which one to bring in. So I'm going to open up After Effects here. We'll get this started. So basically, let me show you the frames that I'm working with. Alright, so we have After Effects open. And I'm going to go to File, or Import File, and I'm going to look for that Maya scene, which actually I saved. Yeah. Okay, so it's right here, Ball Shatter AE. Gonna open. It should open up the render cam. It's going to create a new comp, and you'll see a folder called Solids. That's where actually our locator is. We're going to double click. This is our comp. Should be the correct comp length. You'll notice that there's a camera and that the locator has been made a 3D object, which is fantastic. I'm also going to come over here and import our frames that I rendered out. The Planet Explode. Target sequence, you don't have to do force alphabetical order. You can if you want, actually, it doesn't matter. Just select the first frame, open. We're going to leave it straight for the alpha. We don't want to pre-multiply it, and we don't want to certainly ignore it. We want that alpha. So, awesome. I'm going to click and drag this in here. And notice how this locator actually stayed where our locator was. Now notice it's drifting, obviously, because our camera is drifting. It doesn't look like it's drifting because there's only, so many objects. But that's exactly where we want it to be. So that's pretty cool. Okay, and to add the lens flare, I first am going to... So I have my scene open here, and I have two different views. I came over here to the view, and two horizontal, one's top, one's my active camera. I've got a picture here. It's a public domain picture from the Hubble telescope. It's just a nice galaxy. I'm just going to throw back there, just to kind of set the setting. I'm gonna put it pretty far back, actually as far as I can, because in space there's a lot of space between things. Okay, I'm gonna scale it up too. So probably should have that facing the camera a bit more. That's better. Alright, cool. Awesome. Okay, so we've got just a temp background in there for aesthetic purposes. Alright, so what I want to do is I want to add a nice lens flare, because those are pretty awesome and they're a great way to tell a story if you don't overuse them. So in order to create this lens flare, I have the Videocopilot plugin. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put a lens flare when it explodes. Cool. So I have the Videocopilot plugins, the optical flares, which is an incredible plugin for Mac. Headed up by Andrew Kramer over here at Videocopilot. Plugin is extremely cheap right now. These are the guys who did the end credits for Star Trek Into Darkness, and they are the ones who have been developing these lens flares for professional feature films. It's a really amazing, outstanding plugin, very simple to use, so I'm going to dive right in. First of all, I'm going to create a layer here. I'm going to create a solid, doesn't matter what color. I'm going to name it LF for lens flare, and we're going to say planet. Planet's back. I'll show you why I named that in a second. I'm going to put that behind the planet. Actually, I'll put it in front of the planet for this one. So let me rename that. Alright, and I'm going to click and drag the optical flares onto this layer. This is going to come up, and there's a few things I'm going to need to tweak. First of all, I want to change it to the render mode to be on transparent. Okay, it's looking good. I'm going to take off the background just for right now, and I need to change it to 3D because right now we have a camera move, but it's just going to stay still. So we're going to click 3D, and it's going to disappear. Don't worry, this is where the locator comes in. I'm going to select my position, position XY. I can just double click these guys in here, and I'm going to select both of them. I'm coming over here to animate, add expression. Don't worry, I won't make you write code. Thankfully After Effects is better than that. They have some simple options for more simple users who are not familiar with the coding side of things. So I'm going to pull up that locator, and I want to get the X and Y of that locator. So I'm going to use this position right here, and here I can, it's pretty simple. It's at the origin 0, 0, that's fine. But if the locator was moving, or if it was in a different place, and I want the lens flare to follow that locator, here's a great way to do it. I'm going to come over here to XY, and I'm going to grab this lasso tool, which is called the expression whip, and I'm going to click and drag it over to the expression. You're going to see it made an expression here. So I just want to click outside of that, and that's going to set that for that expression. So it's basically linked to the X and the Y of these positions. So if I move the lens flare, or if I move the locator here, the lens flare is going to follow, because the lens flare is right on there. So I'm going to do the same thing with the position Z, but instead of the position here, I'm going to actually go to Z. So X, Y, Z, and I'm going to let go, and I'm going to make sure this is right, and just click outside, and it is going to be fully linked up to this lens flare. Alright, so right now it's huge. There's a couple ways you can scale this. First, I'm going to scale it here. global scale. Let's take that down to 10. Nope. I kind of play around with these. I suggest going on to the Videocopilot site and going to the tutorials. They have an amazing amount of tutorials that are fantastic for this kind of stuff. They even have an exploding planet tutorial that you can do completely in After Effects, which is pretty amazing. And there's definitely things that you can incorporate from there into here. Yeah, here we go. They create a dying dead planet, and then they have an explosion tutorial. It's a fantastic tutorial. It's only 13 minutes, and you're going to come out with some pretty cool looking stuff, so I suggest taking a look at that. But that's all in After Effects, which is pretty cool. But obviously I wanted to use the Soup plugins because I wanted more control in Maya. Alright, so I'm going to keep reducing the size of this. I'm actually going to come over here into the scale and brightness. Actually, that was too small. I'm going to keep this at 100, and I'm going to reduce the scale and brightness over here to about 35. Okay, so obviously this does not look like a lens flare. That would be made during an explosion. So one thing I can do, I go to this frame here, and I only need this view right now. Go into my options here, and there's a bunch of presets that they have that you can start with, or templates that you are meant to start with, not finish with. But I'm going to look at some of these. Sometimes the interface takes a little while to catch up. Alright, so I'm going to go to motion graphics. We'll look at some of these. And I'm going to take, actually, I'm going to take vertical limit. Now, obviously, I don't want a vertical lens flare. I want a horizontal lens flare. And here's the control panel for adjusting the parameters of the different objects. You have lens objects over here that you can add. I am going to add, I'm going to hide all these multi-irises just for right now. And I'm going to take this streak and I'm going to rotate it back to 0 degrees. That's more like it right here. I'm going to add, I'm going to go to columns and modes here. I'm going to switch this to a screen overlay, a screen mode. Maybe back to normal. Now that actually looks pretty cool. I probably don't want a giant white nebula behind my white explosion. So I'm actually going to move this off to the side. I could probably choose another image. Alright, so I want to key this on and off. And instead of using the transparency, I'm actually going to use the brightness and the scale. So I like what it looks like right here. I think I want to bump up the scale a bit. Yeah, there we go. I want it to be sort of overwhelming at first for this instant. And here I'm going to tone it down to 0 actually. So here we go. I'm going to change these to ease in and ease out. I actually want this to be sudden. Now it's getting dimmer because the camera is actually moving away from the lens flare. I actually want it to die off a little bit. There we go. I want to ease these out too. Looking for the right speed. The problem with this simulation is that I should have had the explosion happen quicker, which is what we had in the first frame. Alright, so I want to have a bit of a fade. I want the lens flare to peak about here in its brightness. And then I'm going to bring it down a little bit faster. So it'll look like an explosion. It's a personal preference, obviously, this timing stuff. So I'm just going to kind of tweak this and move on. Alright. So that looks like it's good. Now here I can replicate this ray effect real quick. Because I didn't have light fog, I sort of made these rays in After Effects. So in order to do that, I'm going to come over here and I'm going to duplicate this. This is our planet layer. I'm going to hide my lens flare just because I don't need to see it real quick. And I'm going to rename this Planet Rays. I'm actually going to pre-compose this and go into that composition. I'm going to select blur over here and I'm going to look for radial blur fast. Radial fast blur. And I'm going to go for brightest. Okay. So that's, I can adjust the center position. Let's make this way out here. Then I'm going to select a layer just to kind of color this. Give it a dark orange or something. That should work. And I'm going to use that to add. Okay, so that looks cool. Alright. So Actually, I have the planet explode, and so we have this right here, but I just want to make this the alpha of this orange. So I'm just going to come over to track matte and select alpha matte. And here we're going to get these rays, which is perfect. That's exactly what we want. So here, it looks over here, in the final comp that we have, I don't want the rays down here, so what I can do is I can select this and sort of create a path I can later animate. Okay, and I'm going to invert this path. Alright, cool. I'll probably need to adjust it so it gets all of this. That should be okay. Alright, I'm going to feather this so it has a more natural fall off. There we go. Bring this down. Now I can animate this. So, actually going to start this at 0 transparency. So hit T to go to opacity. And about here, we can adjust this later. I'll bring up the opacity. We'll do this gently, so we'll ease both of them. And here we can start adjusting the shape of our path. So we're kind of rotoscoping, I guess. I'm going to bring this down. There we go. See how that's animated. Okay, so we got something going here. I don't like these starting out so strong, so I'm going to come into my comp here. And I'm going to have those end up like that. But I'm going to take the amount down to about 45. Oops, that might be too small. Maybe 60. So now it grows. There we go. And now I'm going to start to fade this off. Actually, almost all the way. Here's what we have so far. So here's what we have so far. I'm going to hide this null object, so I don't need to see that on screen. Alright, so we're looking pretty good. To add the camera shake, I can actually pre-compose this whole thing. Add a new camera. make this layer 3D. And I'm going to key the position of interest right here, because that's the thing I'm going to shake. Come over to here, Window Wiggler. It's a fun name. And I can adjust my frequency. And the frequency is how often, obviously, how many keyframes per second. And the magnitude is how great the change will be. So let's see what this looks like. So it's starting to shake too early, so let's back that up. And I kind of want this to fall off so I can start deleting some of these. So let's see what this looks like. Let me take off these so we can see what the pre-comp looks like. We just want to see what that camera shake looks like. That looks like it's going to work for us. Now you'll notice that we get the edge of the frame here, and you'll see this. I'll turn on the background here. See, we can see the edge of the frame, and the way I just adjust that is you can dolly in on the position. Now obviously you're going to lose a bit of your framing. But it's a very cheap way to get motion blur, or to get a camera shake. So cool. Let me turn these guys back on. Before I render this out, I want to make sure that this little icon right here, the motion blur icon, is tabbed on for all of these things. In my comp here, I definitely want that lens flare to be motion blurred, and I want this background to be motion blurred. And I want this planet's layer to be motion blurred. I don't really have to worry about planet explode, that because it's already motion blurred. But we'll put it on for good measure. Alright, awesome. It's time to render it out and see what this looks like. So we have the rendered result here. Take a look at it. Not bad. So there you go. There's a basic planet explosion. It's a great starting point. Alright guys, so that's it for now. Hopefully you enjoyed the tutorial, and hopefully you'll use it as a good starting point to create some really awesome looking stuff.